Lost and found. The orphans of Kherson, liberated after months in hiding. Newsy dedicates months of reporting to tell their remarkable story and the hero who saved them. Sniper, newlywed, and soon-to-be mother. The astonishing story of the woman they call Ukraine's Joan of Arc, what she says saved her life. And the power of love, a champion weightlifter with a heart of gold. These are the stories of courage, compassion, of a country refusing to surrender. Now, Newsy Tonight presents Faces of the War 3. Here again, Jason Bellini in Kyiv.
Hello from Kyiv. It's deceptively beautiful. With the falling snow, there's a rising dread over what winter might bring in a country with a battered electrical grid. Winter will be a test of endurance in a nation where everyone has their own front line, as we found in newly liberated Kherson in the story of the months-long battle to save the most vulnerable of Ukraine's civilians, the orphans. A middle-aged man shuffles through Kherson's central square, just another face in a war-weary crowd. He walks like a man who's endured a brutal occupation, like everyone here. Passing a line of people waiting for aid, a woman calls out, "You're a hero." She's right. His name is Vladimir Sahaidak, and he's the reason we went to Kherson, down a battle-scarred road full of checkpoints and landmine warnings. We wanted to meet him in person and the children he saved. Sahaidak is the director of a home for orphans and other wards of the state, ranging in age from 4 to 15 years old. We first met him via video conference in March, hiding with 50 kids in a crowded room from the invading force of Russians. A 16-year-old named Dennis, one of the older boys here, spoke for the group. Currently, we are occupied by Russians, he says. We see how airplanes fly over our heads. We hear explosions, usually at night or early morning. He said the older boys, like himself, help the younger ones. What's it like for them? Dennis said despite his efforts to distract them with games, even the youngest children are aware of what's happening. At the end of that call, I told Vladimir I'd do my best to get to Kherson, although at the time the chances of that seemed remote.
Well, there he is.
This became possible in November.
Hi.
Our meeting and his grandson waving the Ukrainian flag in public after his country's counteroffensive forced the Russians to abandon Kherson. When we talked, you said you would come, and I'm very glad you did, he says. On the way to the orphanage, he begins the harrowing story of his mission to save the children. We hid all the children because it was dangerous for them to be here, he says. The danger? The Russians were hunting for children to take back to their mother country. Despite this, the flag of Ukraine hung here for 5 months, he says. These explosions we hear now, they were even louder. We saw it all. We heard it all. Our children didn't walk on sports fields and could only spend 15 minutes at a time in the courtyard because shells and rockets were flying by. For months, he guarded the orphanage. He shows us the room where he slept alongside a few staff. Their home was now with the orphans they had vowed to protect. But the war raged on, and finally, the Russians came. There were a lot of Russians, he says, their security service and soldiers. And then what happened? He says they took documents about the children. Of course, the children were scared, as well as the staff, but he says, we withstood the pressure with dignity. When Russian journalists tried to film him, Dennis knew it was for propaganda and turned his back to the camera. No interview.
Нет. Денис жил в этой комнате.
But the room Dennis and the other older boys shared would be the first to be empty. After their visit, the Russians forced Dennis and the other teen boys to go to Crimea.
Are you worried about Dennis?
Очень.
Very, he says.
Why? Потому что это наши дети.
Because these are our children. At that point, he knew he must hide every single child remaining. But it took time, months, to spirit them away. Some with distant family, a few with local volunteers, others with staff.
Мы разговариваем с детьми.
We talked to every single child, he says. We didn't just distribute them among the teachers. We sent each of them with the teacher they loved the most.
Потому что они симпатизировали.
And there they hid.
Свои.
Until now.
По ночам не ходят. Привет. Joan. Ничего, ну отлично. Заходите.
We meet Misha, Katya, and Vlad. They've been living with their teacher, Halina Kulakovska. Here, she and the children hid in fear. Are you happy that the Russians are no longer here?
Конечно.
Yeah, sure.
Ну, потому что они нам жизнь.
Because they broke our lives, says Katya, who's 15.
Ну, все несемо.
The teacher took them into her small apartment with no electricity, her gas stove, the only heat,
Ось так.
her small porch serving as the refrigerator.
Багато часу на роздуми не було.
It was dangerous, both for me and for those who helped us, including the director, she says. We told everyone that these are my niece and nephews. Orphans had started disappearing in Kherson. Volodymyr took us to a church that was supposed to be a sanctuary for 46 orphans, all babies and toddlers. They slept on mattresses and cushions on the floor, but the Russians found them and took them away. There's no accurate count of how many of Ukraine's children have been taken to occupied Crimea and Russia. Ukraine says 8 to 11,000, but reports out of Russia suggest it could be tens of thousands. Among them, Dennis, the 16-year-old who spoke on behalf of the little ones all those months ago.
Потому что это наши дети.
These are our children. They lived with us. They became attached to us, and we became attached to them. We lived here as one family.
И мы к ним привязались.
These orphans had no one else. The orphanage will reopen once Kherson has basic services restored, and Sahadek expects it will have even more children than before the war, with so many parents killed. His hope and prayer is that Dennis will one day be back among them. Up next, from ducking Russian shells to an explosion of joy, the incredible story of a red-headed sniper they call Ukraine's Joan of Arc.
You're watching Newsy Tonight Presents Faces of the War. Here again, Jason Bellini in Kyiv.
Someday there's a movie to be made about the war in Ukraine, of a red-haired woman born with a gun in her hand, called to duty as a sniper, whose life took a joyful turn. No need to wait, because that story is now. The sound of a Russian drone on the front lines, hovering near Yevgenia Emerald. It's trying to find us, she says. If it sees her, she knows what sound could come next. The whiz, then bang of incoming artillery. Spot the target, dial it in, and fire. It's a tactic she knows well, because Emerald is a sniper. We met Emerald in a fully blacked out part of the capital, Kyiv, far from the trenches she lived in for months.
It's a very important thing.
Coming back to her home in Kyiv with no electricity feels oddly normal. And so now does being a woman fighting with an otherwise all-male squad.
Just me
Just you.
and a lot of men.
And were they always respectful to you?
Yes, they really respect me, and they said that I'm a war genius.
They said you're a war genius.
Yes.
Did you have a nickname?
Yes.
What?
Ukrainian Jeanne d'Arc.
Ukrainian Joan of Arc. That title and her bright eyes and flaming red hair, the army emblazoned on a patch they made for her. When did you learn how to be a sniper?
Зі снайперської гвинтівки.
I got my first weapon in my hands from my dad when I was just a kid, she says. And in the years since, she's built up her own collection of rifles.
My toys.
Thanks to those years of practice with her dad, Emerald thrived in a military program similar to the ROTC at her university, but after graduating, she chose civilian life, opening her own jewelry business. Emerald, by the way, is a nickname she adopted. Then, after the Russians invaded in February, the army reached out to their former prodigy.
They called you and said,
Evgenia, we need you.
I have to ask. Give me some numbers.
Никогда не отвечаю. Николи не
How many did I kill? I never answer this question, she says. She won't talk about her best day, but she will her worst. The one last spring when the Russians routed her unit in a village north of Kharkiv, killing some of her closest friends who were down the road ahead of her.
чином не могла.
I couldn't help them in any way, she says.
Did you see them die?
Of course.
You saw them through your scope?
Я бачила і
I saw through the scope how people died, and comrades died right next to me, she says.
Was there any one person that you were especially close to who died that day?
Так,
Yes, she says, her mentor, who taught her how to be a sniper.
досі.
I cried every day for about 2 months after that, she says.
Could you continue to fight after that?
Да,
Of course I could, she says. I had thirst for revenge.
була жага помсти.
Revenge, killing, dying. The evils of war are all around. But for her, it's about more.
I always say that war, it's about life.
War is about life?
Yes.
That may sound odd, but there's a reason for her to smile. Because for Emerald, war led to love.
You met him this summer.
Yes.
Where?
Online, in Instagram.
So you're fighting
Yes.
and you're on Instagram using Starlink?
Yes, we have Starlink.
Is that how you connected?
Yes.
Yev Henley, an artilleryman fighting in a different area of the country, arranged leave times so they could meet in person.
You only spent 3 days together?
Yes, just 3 days.
And you knew he was the one.
Yes.
Why him?
I saw him and understand that this man will be my husband.
A week later, Yev Henley came to her command post in Zaporizhia to propose. Then, in October, she went to his position this time, in a forest near Kharkiv,
Чи добровільно вступаєте в шлюб?
for the closest thing a war zone has to a fairy tale wedding. And by the time they made it official, they were already a family.
So the first 2 months of your pregnancy, you were still firing your weapon.
Так, yes.
Yes, she says, and I continued to live in the trenches and basements just like everyone else.
Did they know you were pregnant?
Today they know.
Today they know, but did they know then?
They don't know that.
You knew.
Just me.
Where were you when you found out that you're pregnant?
Артилерія, яка тільки може бути.
We've been shelled all day by artillery, and when everyone else was sitting there afraid, I could only think of one thing,
Піцу. Я так хотіла піцу.
that I want pizza. She says that's when I began to suspect I was pregnant.
Я вагітна.
Forgive me if this is too personal, but did you want to be a mother and did your husband want to be a father?
Of course, it's a gift, I think, and a lot of my friends said that this baby save your life, and I believe in this.
She says that because a couple days after she left her unit, 2 men she would have been fighting next to died. Now Emerald is back in Kyiv.
Military car.
She's keeping the camo paint job on her Porsche, but she has no plans to return to the front. While her husband continues fighting, her mother is by her side, at night, literally,
Now I sleep on the sofa with my mother.
by her still unpacked military gear, because they're hosting a family made homeless by the war. When she thinks about the stories she'll tell her child of what she did in the war and how she met Yev Henley, they amaze even her.
Look at me. In this war, I was sniper.
A sniper, and soon a mother on a new front line. Emerald invited us to come to an event for revealing the gender of their baby. Her husband taking leave from the front line to be with her in person so they could find out together that in March, they're expecting a girl.
This is Newsy Tonight Presents Faces of the War.
Here, our house.
Your house.
Yes, it's our house.
Over months lived in dust and mud, rockets and shells shaking the ground at all hours.
It's my bed.
That's where you sleep.
Yes.
Even the most inhospitable places begin to feel like home.
Are you going to miss this place?
Of course, I will remember for all my life this place. But next position will my home, because it's all my home. I save my home.
As the front line moves east, so too does Ukraine Army's 63rd Brigade. Being strong. That's what one woman, Anna Kurkarina, devoted her life to long before the war. She has the weightlifting trophies to show for it. But she believes the greatest strength of all is kindness. In the besieged city of Mykolaiv, she's saving abandoned pets from the brutal Ukraine winter. The affection of a dog that knows she would not be alive, save for Anna Kurkarina. The dog's leg injured by shrapnel, evacuated by her to Kyiv for surgery. A cat rescued early in the war. Back then its hair was fully black, Kurkarina says.
So cats get gray hair from stress too.
Yeah.
Russia has bombed or fired missiles at Mykolaiv on all but a few dozen days, a frequency unparalleled in any other Ukrainian city. Some owners have died, and thousands have fled, reluctantly leaving behind their pets, who now endure the war alone. Saving those animals is now the mission of Kurkarina, who has never left Mykolaiv. In this war, this is her front line. These places where packs of dogs and cats, former pets, scavenge for food.
You'll continue to feed these animals all winter long?
How can you abandon your children? These are children. We are responsible for them, Kurkarina says.
How often do you visit dogs in different locations?
Every day, when I have food, she says. Now I have no food, and I'm searching. The most tragic thing in my life is when I don't have food. I feel really bad because all over the city and from many villages, people call me and ask me for food for the dogs, and it makes me realize that animals are dying. But on this day, she has in her van something perhaps even more vital: insulated dog houses. She's delivering them to places where the animals collect. She hopes that with these shelters and the warmth of one another, dogs here will survive the brutal winter. At this apartment complex, a woman shows Kurkarina the forest sanctuary she built for abandoned cats, and tells her of one that recently showed up, too weak and malnourished to be saved. Next, Kurkarina meets a local pet store owner who offered her some bags of food he had in storage. Back at her house, a few of the many animals she saved are waiting for her. Only 4 of these cats are hers, she says. This is when I won my first weightlifting championship in America, she says. Before Russia's invasion in February, she trained young athletes in her sport.
Is there anything about being a weightlifter that helped prepare you for this war?
In 2 ways, she says. First, I'm a world champion, and many people know me. It helped me to get humanitarian aid from my fans. Second, the most powerful woman on the planet should also be the kindest.
How do cats and dogs respond to the sounds of war when they're hearing it every day?
Cats don't really react, she says. The dogs, since the beginning of the war, they've panicked. Many of them died of heart attacks. I'm trying to find sedatives to give the dogs because a lot of their deaths are not from direct missile hits, but from broken hearts. That's why she's using her network to evacuate them to new homes abroad. And now, with the Russian retreat from Kherson, her home will soon be down 2 dogs. These 2 German Shepherds are from the front line. Their owners were forced to leave during the shelling of villages near Kherson. They weren't allowed to bring them, and they've waited 8 months for the moment when they can reunite. Having a mission and all this love around her helps Kurkarina stay strong, even with her girlfriend being away since February.
Why did she leave?
There was the threat that Mykolaiv would be captured, she says. I was worried because she's a very beautiful girl, blonde. Since the Russian army is not very humane with young, beautiful girls, I decided to send her abroad. Days after our interview, Russian missiles struck another apartment complex in Mykolaiv. But it appears nothing will force a world champion of kindness to quit. I won't leave them. I won't be able to ever, she says. You can't continue to live in peace when you save one life while thousands of others die. These are just some of the faces of the war we've been reporting on since Russia invaded Ukraine last February. We wanted to update you on one of them, a man we met over the summer, Alexander Kamyshin. He's the head of Ukraine's national railroad system. Since we profiled him, he's been on the cover of the New York Times Magazine, his exploits widely followed as he leads from the rails of war. He's the commander of what many call the Second Army of Ukraine.
We are hard people. We are iron people.
Combative, inventive. When the Russian missiles knocked out power to most of Ukraine, including the rails, he brought back vintage steam locomotives and posted about it on social media as a response to Vladimir Putin. Since we rode the battle-scarred rails with him in his command car last summer, Kamyshin has emerged as a global symbol of Ukrainian resilience, restoring service to Kherson just days after Russia abruptly withdrew from the city, ending its 8-month occupation. Kamyshin's friend, Chef Jose Andres, the founder of World Central Kitchen, rode with him.
What you see here is a train of hope.
A couple days later, Kamyshin put the besieged southern port city Mykolaiv back on track for the first time since Russia's invasion in February. But now Kamyshin and his country are in the long-dreaded season of peril.
Winter is coming.
Kamyshin is transforming his railway stations into places of refuge for people in need of mobile charging, food and warmth, and even medical treatment provided by Doctors Without Borders. Kamyshin's staff slogan, "What more can we do?" is in full action. But so are Russia's efforts to derail his army of workers, 300 of whom died this year in service of providing not just a service, but a lifeline, extending as far as they can go.
This stop, Mykolaiv, but it won't be the last. That's if Ukraine can push forward on the front and hang on at home. If they're able to do that, it'll be because of the spirit we found behind the faces of war. Reporting from Kyiv, I'm Jason Bellini. Thanks for joining us.